Hello everyone, this is Dimitri, and this video is going to be sort of like a quick build overview and sort of like a mini guide for my version of the Sorcerer's build with Blizzard Ice Shards. I managed to play this build all the way to level 100 in hardcore. Very happy how it turned out. It worked pretty well. It was very fun to play and it felt very safe. So let's show you some gameplay and then we'll dive right into it. Alright, over here we have ourselves some gameplay. To demonstrate what this build really is about. As you can see, mainly what we're going to be trying doing is dropping a lot of blizzards, which will end up freezing a lot of enemies. And thanks to one of our enchantments that we have on our skills, the Ice Shard enchantment, this thing conjures and generates ice shards that seek out nearby frozen targets. So what we're going to be doing is trying to drop a lot of blizzards like this, freeze everything that we can nearby, and then send out these ice shards. Whenever we need more specific damage, we throw out ice shards manually, and we kind of go from there. Elites aren't really much of a problem either, thanks to the permanent freeze. Chill and freeze is an absolutely fantastic defensive tool, of which this build has many. Allowed me to push to 100 in hardcore, thankfully. But yeah, overall, it's just very fun to play. The clear is pretty great. It's not the fastest, I would say, unless you end up investing more into Frost Nova and Teleport specifically. But it has lots of cool explosions in the form of Shatter, things like that. Blizzard itself feels pretty fun to play with, even if things get a little bit hectic at times. Defensively, build does absolutely great. We have lots of damage reduction. We have chill and freezes, as I mentioned before. Build has multiple versions of Unstoppable, so CC usually isn't that much of an issue. We have Teleport to get around, also one of the sources of Unstoppable, gives us a bit of damage reduction too. We've got Ice Armor to give us like permanent barriers, and barriers are going to be quite important in this build, and I think for sorcerers in general. We've got Deep Freeze here to help us out in case we end up in a sticky situation. This bubble, perfectly timed, is also one of our defensive layers, just in case we actually do end up getting hit. Every once in a while, we'll just have a defensive bubble to help out more, things like that. Overall, I really enjoyed this build. It was an absolute blast to play, and I'm probably going to reroll into softcore and try out another version of this build, because I just really like how it plays. Anyway, onto the actual build. And first off is skills. I end up using Ice Shards and Blizzard as our main forms of damage. Ice Shards is really good damage, very high single target damage as well. You can use it manually yourself. Very useful all around. And Blizzard is the other aspect that we drop on bosses to chill and freeze them. We drop it on enemies to kind of start the entire chain of procs as well. And that is because of this enchantment on Ice Shards. Ice Shards automatically conjure and fly towards frozen enemies. We use Blizzard to freeze enemies. Ice Shards fly around, start ricocheting thanks to the skill tree, all of that good stuff. Then for the remainder of our ability slots, I use Frost Nova, that is a freeze. It also restores a bit of mana. Overall, very defensive as well. Great ability. Almost a must-have on most builds, I would say. Ice Armor gives us a barrier, gives us a bit of mana regen. Overall, very good ability to have. Teleport, a very low cooldown. It makes you unstoppable, so you can use it to break out of CC. Absolutely great. And then finally, I use Deep Freeze as sort of like an oh shit button in hardcore. If I find myself in a situation where my other cooldowns are not up yet, I find myself getting CC'd and I don't know what to do, I press Deep Freeze and I am safe. It makes you immune, which also makes you immune to CC. Gives you a bit of time to think about how you're going to break out of the situation, gives you time to, like, you know, catch your breath for a little bit, pop a health potion if you need to, etc., and try to survive longer. As for the skill tree, I run Frostbolt first. We just need 2 points to be able to get to the next stage. Frostbolt early on while you're leveling is actually pretty nice to have, especially with Enhanced, giving a little bit of freeze and chill. I keep this on my bar until I've managed to fix my mana issues later down the line, but even then we need it to get to the next stage. The next stage being Ice Shards. We max this out as high as we go. And I like to take the Vulnerable. Vulnerable is a great source of damage in this game, almost mandatory in the current state of the game, and this is just a really quick and easy way to get Ice Shards. The other option is not that great, IMO, as we will be freezing most enemies anyway, so what really is the point? And having access to a nice amount of Ice Shards is good. Also end up picking up like 1 and 2 points extra here, a little bit of extra damage, a little bit of extra mana. Not the greatest, but we kind of need the points later down the line. More on that. For defensive skills, we end up spending quite a few points here. I play hardcore, so I ended up going Flame Shield into Enhanced Flame Shield and then especially Shimmering Flame Shield, which heals you. And that is mainly because of this enchantment right here. This is our second enchantment. Flame Shield automatically procs once every 2 minutes once you take fatal damage. This has saved my life multiple times, and whenever I see this proc, I immediately leave the dungeon, wait it out, try again later. Makes the build very safe to play as sort of like your last oh shit moment. Other than that, I mentioned before, we take Teleport with Enhanced Teleport and Shimmering Teleport. I want the damage reduction, I value that very highly. I take Ice Armor for a little bit of extra barrier, a little bit of extra mana regeneration, which helps on bosses. And I take 1 point in Frost Nova along with Enhanced and Shimmering Frost Nova to help keep your mana pool up. You could take Mystical, I've seen lots of people do that as well. I prefer running Destructive Ice Shards instead on most mod packs. I don't feel the need to apply Vulnerable to them, they die fast enough, but that might change later down the line. And 1 point in Elemental Attunement to get some lucky hit resets. Making our way to Conjuration, we basically ignore most of this. We take the lucky hit chance 15%, we take 1 point in Align the Elements and go for a bit of protection. Along with the lower cooldowns that we tend to have, this gives us quite a bit of barrier uptime, which is very nice. More HP is more HP. Then we make our way down to Mastery skills. I take 1 point in Icy Veil, and then 3 points in Cold Front, 3 points in Snap Freeze. You could mess around with some of these points here and there. I put 5 points in Blizzard, along with 4 from Pan, but we'll get to items in a little bit. You could take out some of these points. I've been a bit hesitant. I personally like Blizzard doing a bit more damage to finish off stragglers that might not have gotten frozen yet, that might have been hit by Ice Shards. But if you wanted to save points and, for example, put more into Frost Nova to lower the cooldown of that, I would start here. Take out points of Blizzard, go somewhere else. That said, Enhanced Blizzard and especially Mage's Blizzard, very important. The extra 4 seconds might not sound like a lot, but in actual gameplay purposes, this thing is great to have. So we go that route. And then over here, I basically max out this entire wheel worth of points. There's a lot of damage to be found here. Increased damage to elites, increased damage to chilled and frozen enemies. Vulnerable enemies can give you some mana restore, which is very helpful. Icy Touch for more cold damage to vulnerable enemies. I put 1 point into Deep Freeze, as I said, that last moment escape, that moment to catch your breath and figure out how you're going to get out of the situation. And then finally, the capstone point for me was Shatter. Early on, you might want to swap this around with Avalanche, try it out. Avalanche will help you sustain your mana a bit more. So unless you're like later down the line, later in your build, you have got your resource management fixed for the most part. I would suggest using Shatter, but if you don't yet, or if you're still leveling, Avalanche could actually be the nice way to go. It makes Ice Shards or Blizzard consume no mana for your next cast, and allows it to deal increased damage too, which is always nice. But I personally like Shatter. The explosions feel absolutely great. It increases your clear quite a bit. It's pretty nice. As for the items and legendary aspects, we have quite a few things to go over, so let's get to work. The helmet is just going to be a legendary / rare helmet. I personally value life a lot on this one, and cooldown reduction were the two main stats that I was looking for. Life on helmets is always important in hardcore. Cooldown reduction, very important for the build. The more cooldown reduction you can get, the smoother it will feel, especially with your defensive tools over here. Other than that, I went for some armor, some int, whatever stats you can find really that will benefit you. The imprint on this one that I went for is protecting. Now this is another thing for hardcore. If you're in softcore, you might want to swap this around with some other things. Try some stuff out here and there, see what you enjoy. But protecting is the one that I went for. This has helped me quite a few times in sticky situations where I'm getting perma-CC'd, my barrier starts going down from hits. I eventually end up taking HP damage. That's when the bubble will proc, once I'm not healthy anymore. And then I get cleansed out of CC, I become immune for 5 seconds. An absolute lifesaver. Also helps against DCs, the little lag spikes here and there. This has saved me a few times from that, from probably some grisly deaths, so I value this one a lot. I did not at the start, but as I went further and further on, it became quite good. The chest piece, damage reduction, life are the two main things you want on here. A little bit of int is always nice for some damage, I suppose, but more damage reduction, the better. More life, the better. As for the aspect on this, lucky hit chance while you have a barrier. We're going to get quite a bit of lucky hit chance from this, and the imprint on this one, which is the fortune aspect, really nice to have. You could also roll that stat actually on a helmet. I just don't have it, but lucky hit chance while you have a barrier is a thing sorcerers can roll on the helmet, so could be worth going for. As for the gems actually in both of these, damage reduction while control impaired, very, very useful. Combined with your pants, this gives you like 40% damage reduction in case you end up getting CC'd. You should have plenty of ways out of CC with this build, but it never hurts to have more damage reduction, so I value that pretty highly. Gloves. Pure offense, I go for +4 ranks to Ice Shard, lucky hit chance, critical strike chance, and primary resource restore. I don't go for attack speed. There's a little bit of it on the Paragon tree, we'll get to that in a bit, but personally, with the way that Blizzard and Ice Shards end up working, I was pretty comfortable with the attack speed that I already had, but if you feel like it's still too clunky, too sluggish, going for attack speed on here and maybe ditching the resource or the lucky hit chance really doesn't hurt all that much. Try it out. As for the aspect on this one, Ice Shards Pierce, dealing less damage, really will help your clear with the ricochets and the pierces and all that other stuff, along with Shatter. It's a very nice aspect to have. The damage and the rolls on it doesn't matter too much as long as you just get access to a bit of Pierce. As for your pants, damage reduction, damage reduction, damage reduction, and life. I also went for the +4 ranks in Blizzard here. As I mentioned before, I value Blizzard ranks pretty highly, but if you can get more damage reduction on this, it'll make you feel safer. Even in softcore, life and damage reduction on pants is probably your way to go. As for the aspect, I went with Disobedience. Disobedience is really, really powerful, and with the amount of times Blizzard hits, along with the ice spikes that we get from the glacial aspect in a bit, we'll talk about that. Stacking up to 100 is really not that difficult once you're going through the dungeon. On bosses, you might not hit 100, but even maintaining like 70, 80 stacks on the boss will really help with your survivability. For the boots, movement speed, mana cost reduction were the two main stats that I was looking for. Ranks to Frost Nova, Ice Armor, Teleport are all very useful, very beneficial. And then some intelligence to go along with it. Like I said, doesn't hurt. But movement speed and mana cost reduction were the two main stats that I personally wanted to go for, along with the boot base. Evade grants movement speed. It's a personal preference thing, but I found this the most comfortable out of the three bases for boots, so those were the ones that I went for. As for the aspect, Exploiters, really good. A bit of increased CC duration, along with when bosses cannot be CC'd, when they're unstoppable, you deal quite a bit of extra damage to them. This is there to offset the fact that we might not be able to get things like frozen on bosses for a little while, so Exploiters are very useful in that case. Amulet-wise, I don't have the perfect amulet, or the way that I wanted to get, but the two main stats that I was looking for were cooldown reduction and mana cost reduction. Other than that, try to get something with, you know, like this, +3 ranks to Icy Touch, Hoarfrost, anything that really benefits the builds with ranks to it. You could go for +3 to defensive skills, would be a very useful one, as it will reduce the cooldown and increase the amount of ice barrier that you get from all of these abilities. Very useful overall. You could go for +3 mastery as well for even more blizzard damage, but I don't think I would recommend it as much. +3 defensive would be really nice here though, instead of the movement speed, but movement speed is not a bad thing either to have. Then come the rings. There were two main stats that I was looking for rings personally, and that would be life and resource regeneration. Rings are mostly about pure offensive stats, I would say, and if you're in softcore, definitely go for even more offensive stats. But for me, I really value the life a lot, and this build started feeling a lot better as soon as I started rolling resource generation on rings. You can only find these in World Tier 4, I think, with resource generation on them, but as soon as you can get that, I would highly recommend searching out 2 pairs of rings that have at least that on them. Same here, I have life resource generation on these ones. The stats after that you want to look for is anything to do with crit and vulnerable damage. I have lucky hit here along with critical strike damage. That's pretty good. I haven't found an upgrade to this one yet. I would like to get rid of the lucky hit chance and try to roll vulnerable damage on it even, but it works just fine for now. But this is sort of basically the type of ring that I'm looking for. Life, resource generation, critical strike damage, and chance. I completely forgot about the amulet aspect. Let me go over those as well. On the amulets, amulets get boosted by 50% for their aspect. I would highly recommend Elementalist. This gives you nearly 60% critical strike damage while you have enough resources. If you are above 100 mana, you basically fix all of your crit chance. This thing is invaluable, and I don't think I could recommend anything else other than Elementalist on an amulet slot. As for the rings, Glacial, very important one to have. It might not feel like a lot of damage and it might be a bit odd to see, but the ice spikes really help with building stagger on bosses. When it comes to actually clearing packs of mobs in a dungeon, this build has no issue whatsoever, very comfortable. On bosses, I needed to build up a little bit more stagger, as a lot of this build's damage comes from doing damage to shield targets, frozen targets, and bosses count as unstoppable until you build up their stagger bar. This Ice Spikes enchant, it could be whatever role, just as long as you have it, will help a lot with that, and it'll make Blizzard feel a lot more impactful when it comes to stagger building. So highly recommend that one. And then the second one that I have is Prodigy, to restore a bit of mana every time you use a cooldown. This is also where the cooldown reduction comes into the build and why it's so important. We will basically be rebuilding mana every time we pop all of these. The more CDR you have, the more mana you'll be getting back as well over time, allowing you to pop that up. The resource generation also helps with this to give you even more mana back. Frost Nova's modifier that we talked about before, generating more mana per enemy hit. This is kind of how we will sustain mana in the build. And then finally, the weapon. This is where you have a choice to make. I personally went for a staff because I, as a person, really like staves, and I also managed to get a really good staff. But it depends on what you want to do. I would say early on in the game, a wand plus a focus will likely get you much further and it'll get you up to speed much quicker. It'll make the build feel more comfortable. The reason for that is that the wand is nice and all, but a focus, a well-rolled focus, allows you to reroll, roll stats like these. It comes with innate cooldown reduction, it has resource generation, mana cost reduction, you can get lucky hit chance, all kinds of very useful utility stats to make things feel way nicer. Along with the wand, you can get some more lucky hit chance, you can get good damage on it. You were preferably looking for stats like critical strike damage, damage to close enemies, intelligence, core skill damage, vulnerable damage, things like that. However, I went with a staff. Mine has core skill damage, critical strike damage, vulnerable damage on it, and even a bit of damage to frozen enemies. The imprint that you're looking for on your main hand is this one, Control. On a staff, this will allow you to get up to 70% more damage to frozen enemies, which is why building up the stagger bar is so important on bosses as well. But also, just playing around with freezing monster packs, just straight up doing 70% more damage to them with the aspect of control feels great. It's lots of damage. If you're gonna go for wand focus, roll it on your wand, I would say. If you end up going for the wand focus, however, you will have an extra aspect to go for as well. I messed around with a few things. You could try to go for something like this one, Shatter. There's a few other options, mess around with it. Personally, I would suggest going for something like Edge Masters, which gives you more damage the more resource you have. Going for something that, while enemies are vulnerable, like you deal more damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier up, is also a very good choice. Probably would recommend that one even. But on your main hand, you want the aspect of control. Alright, that's the gear then. Now on to Paragons. Finally, we have the Paragon Board, and this is where you can get quite a bit of customization in Diablo 4. We start off with the starter board, and I went with the Adept glyph in here. This gives you mastery skill damage, which is kind of nice for Blizzard, as I touched on before. I like Blizzard itself doing a bit of damage. It's still not much damage, but it's enough to finish off stragglers. However, I mainly value the mastery skills have 20% increased area from this one. You managed to get 40 intelligence within range, and considering this is your starting board, should be easy enough. It ends up going really nicely. Other than that, I did not pick up these nodes until way later down the line for a bit of life and resistances, and I would suggest you make your way over to the next board, which is going to be Icefall. I traveled up around here as I was leveling, grabbing damage reduction from some chilled enemies. Icefall itself is a very nice notable to have in this build. Killing a frozen enemy grants you barrier. In dungeons, this basically keeps your barrier topped up at all times. It is fantastic. I love Icefall. Great ability to have. I then made my way over to here, where we do a bit more damage to chilled enemies, and all the way up here. I then grabbed Reinforced. You don't have to level this as much early on, but this was just the glyph that I wanted to get because it gives you a bonus to all rare nodes within range. This gives you a lot more damage to chilled enemies, which is very nice, and I value the damage reduction from chilled enemies quite a bit as well here. I will not be going for any burning damage in this build, so getting additional sources of damage reduction, especially in hardcore, this was nice. With blizzards basically being cast everywhere, having a lot of damage reduction from chilled enemies felt pretty nice to have. I then made my way over towards this board, the Elemental Summoner board. We ignored the legendary node on this one, but there's a bit of attack speed here. I currently don't have enough dexterity actually to trigger the 2.5% extra attack speed. Might be something to look out for if you manage to roll like all stats or something like that on one of your pieces. Might be a good idea to keep it, get a bit more attack speed yourself. And then I immediately went over towards this glyph right here. This is probably like the main thing that I wanted to get first of all. Every 5 willpower with Frostbite gives you increased damage to chilled enemies. As you can see up there, that is a lot of damage to chilled enemies. You can get a bit of like all res. It's honestly nothing too much here. A little bit of like willpower everywhere. I kind of picked that up as I went and just started leveling this one. That made the build feel much more comfortable, together with this node right here. Reservoir nearby gives you a lot of maximum mana flat. As you can see, plus 16 from this one, and the minor nodes give you plus 4 as well. Pushes you above that 100 mana threshold that you need for things like the Elementalist aspect. Afterwards, I think I went up here, added this board, Frigid Fate, and I first made my way over to the Glyph Socket again. The slot in Tactician gives bonus to all rare nodes within range, gives us a bit of increased damage after casting a defensive skill, and I ended up for weakness first, because vulnerable damage, with the way that damage scales in the game currently, is very valuable to have, and increasing the amount of vulnerable damage that we get from this, fantastic. You might even want to go for this earlier than this board per se if you feel like it. I just ended up really liking the max mana and the damage to chilled enemies for a little while, and then I made my way over here to the vulnerable damage nodes. Finally, I ended up picking up some dexterity to trigger the bonus as well, where we get the extra damage after casting a defensive skill. And then after that, I went for this board over here, back to the Elemental Summoner, and picked up the Ceaseless Conduit board, where I went for Destruction in here. This gives your core skills increased critical strike damage, and as you can imagine, that is very powerful once you start leveling up the glyph and once you start picking up dexterity. Ended up with 97% critical strike damage extra for ice shards. A lot of damage to be found there. And for the last few levels, I kind of picked up all the other nodes that I could find. I made my way over to Frigid Fate to get the lucky hit chance up a bit more. I then started making my way over to things like this, for more vulnerable damage. I started picking up these nodes for a bit of like lucky hit chance, a little bit extra. I was in the area, might as well, right, for the last few levels. I ended up picking up some more chill application and cold damage over here, and I finally went down here to pick up a little bit more life and resistances in my push to 100. And there you have it. I think that covers most of the build. Overall, it's very fun to play. It felt very safe to level, thanks to the multiple sources of Unstoppable. I ended up with about 14k life towards the end of the build. I was pushing a couple of nightmare tiers higher than my level was. Sometimes even doing like nightmare dungeons like 7-8 levels higher than myself, and honestly feeling pretty comfortable with it. if you are going to go do that, I would recommend not running any resource burn and not running any death balls. I think are the two main ones that I ended up avoiding. But try it out, see how things go for yourself. I will be posting the D4 builds guide in the description as well, if you would just like to see that. But I think that covers just about everything else. I've explained all of the aspects, why we take certain things here and there. Should be pretty good then. And then I hope you enjoy the build video. Sorry that's kind of just quickly put together, but hey, it gets the message out there. This is how I ended up running the build. And now I'm going to re-roll into softcore to play with friends and try out a whole bunch more different ideas. So yeah, thank you very much for watching if you've made it this far. Appreciate it. And hope to see you within the stream at one point. Make sure to check that out as well. And until next time, peace.